Wargaming has done it again. They've released the premium representative of a tech tree line well before the line is even announced, and without its unique mechanic from PC tanks. The first time they did this, we talked about it in this video, speculating that the second line of Japanese heavies would be the next tech tree line because the Type 63 Tier 8 premium representative was released way back in the same season as the Japanese tank destroyers. It also did not have the mechanic it has on PC with the double aim time. This time around, we have the Polish tank destroyers being teased for next year's release with the Tier 8 premium representative, the SDP WZ-66 Grom. This tank, like the Type 63, does not have the unique Star Trace shell mechanic from PC, and whether these two tanks are indicative of their lines upon their release is yet to be known. Now, this tank is a very important tank in my opinion, which is why it was very important to me to have this tank. So I must thank the one and only One Odd Buck for gifting me this tank on Tuesday, so some W Buck comments would be appreciated. Now, this tank deserves a longer discussion than usual, not just going over its statistics, but also going over its PC counterpart and the differences between them, what the removal of the mechanic meant for this tank and means for the line, and the fears and worries I have for the tier 10 of the line in particular, as well as comparing it to the one tank that I see many comparing it to. So buckle in for this one, it's going to be a long one. Let's start with the biggest thing with this tank, and that is the fact that it does not have the Star Traced shell mechanic from PC. For those that might not keep up with PC's content, let's go over what the Star Trace shells do differently. The Polish tank destroyers all share this unique mechanic from tier 8 and up, and their guns have unique shapes to them as well as calibers. As you can see, this is the tier 8 tech tree tank from PC, and it has this weird almost ninja star shape to the inside of the barrel that gives it a weird caliber. This tank in particular being a 100 to 162mm gun. The way that's determined is that the shortest width within the barrel is 100mm from wall to wall of the inside of the star, as they call it, and from tip to tip, or the longest possible width, is the 162mm. This creates a unique caliber for this line and interesting questions about the overmatch mechanic we'll get into later. But with a unique caliber, they also gave it a unique mechanic on PC tanks. The alpha damage of these tanks, tier A and up, have a linear variable to them. The closer you are to your target, the higher the damage. The reload stays the same, of course, meaning your DPM is also variable depending on your distance from your target. So for the Grom we're going over today, on PC, this tank does 800 damage at targets 50 meters or closer, and 200 damage at targets 500 meters or further. This damage is then linearly connected, giving you different values at different ranges, like dealing roughly 530 alpha damage at 250 meters, for example. This gives the tank a unique capability to have very high DPM in close quarters, good enough DPM and damage at mid-ranges, and poor DPM and damage at super long ranges. The damage values, of course, still play within the ±25% RNG damage ranges per shot, meaning you could roll for 1000 damage with a maximum roll at closer than 50 meters. Mind you, that range of ±25% is PC's range. We have a ±20% range on console in World War II. And with that mechanic explained, you don't have to think about it for the rest of the video because it's not on this tank, which meant Wargaming console had to make some decisions. What's the DPM value they give it? What alpha damage do they choose? How have they decided to balance the tank? Well, now it's time we go over the Grom. We always start by looking at the gun, which in the Grom's case is also a 100 to 162mm gun. But immediately we notice something different. This tank on PC has a more squarish inside of the barrel as opposed to that ninja star shaped one I showed you earlier. But here on console, we slapped a muzzle on the end of the barrel, and thus it just looks like a normal circular barrel. So not sure if we couldn't model the shape or whatever the reason for hiding it is, but regardless, what this means for the overmatch mechanic is that you actually have the 100mm gun in the overmatch calculation. You cannot overmatch plates that the 162mm side of this gun would be able to. So, up to 33mm plates or lower are overmatchable. This also means stirves aren't as easy as you'd think with their 40mm thick armor. You will have to aim at their cupolas. With the ranges from 200 to 800 damage, we've decided to give it a 700 alpha damage value. Thankfully, it wasn't the maximum, right? We've nerfed the reload as well to 16.8 seconds base, which with the alpha damage chosen gives it a DPM value of 2499, or 2500 basically. This is good DPM and puts it in a nice spot. While PC's DPM for this tank ranges from 750 at maximum range to 3000 DPM at minimum distance, I'd say this was a decent choice. Personally, however, I would have preferred a 600 or 650 alpha damage for this tank to be more unique at this tier, since there aren't any of those, and yes, there's no 700s either, but there are 750s. As for what this tank fires, it gets 2 APCR rounds, the standard with 260mm of penetration and 1400 shell speed, and the premium with 290mm of penetration and a whopping 1600 shell speed. This is massive, and is the second fastest round in World War II so far, right behind the K91's standard 1700 shell speed. This is so fast, it feels like a hit scan weapon in the game, and it's extremely punishing at catching players as they try to dip into cover. It's very forgiving that way. It is worth mentioning that the pen values were nerfed from PC's 272 standard and 296 premium, but honestly, it's not that bad. But it is interesting to question why we've decided that in the first place, because maybe it's their way to make sniping a bit less effective since we don't have the variable damage mechanic. I don't know. Either way, the pen values are slightly high for standard, but average for its premium APCR within the tank destroyer class at tier 8. As for this tank's gun handling, it's pretty good for its damage, with a 0.4 base accuracy, which doesn't sound great, but it's good for the damage again, and 2.7 seconds aim time. Again, for its caliber and damage, this is pretty good gun handling, relatively speaking. And surprisingly, it's got a decent 7 degrees of gun depression, which is really helpful to hide the small lower plate and work some ridges more so than tanks with 5 degrees, like the tank we'll compare to later on. I have to say one more thing before we move on from the gun though, and that's the gun arc. It's only 5 degrees to the left and right, which is pretty bad, but honestly, it's only screwed me over 1 or 2 times, mostly up close. But sniping with your 1600 shell speed, it's not at all that bad. Armor-wise, this tank is pretty darn good. The face of the casemate was buffed from PC's 195 to our 210mm plate, which gives it way more effective armor against tier 10 tanks. The sides of the face were buffed by 10mm from 170 to 180mm thick, and even the upper plate was buffed by 20mm from 100 to 120mm thick. This armor is very well angled and thick enough to bounce many equal tiered premium rounds from mediums and such, and even most tier 10 standard rounds from mediums and heavies as well. It was quite reliable armor for me during my play sessions. The sides aren't great, however, at 50mm thick, but you can't side scrape anyway with that gun arc, so it's not really relevant, as the best you can do is a 5-degree tilt to one side and hope your armor holds up against whatever you're staring at. And it does for the most part. You just have to do your part in hiding the lower plate and peeking as little as possible, and that 7 degrees of gun depression will help you with that. You do have these little cupolas on top that are both 90mm thick and very short enough and far back enough that when using your gun depression, they are not visible at all. But they are when fighting on flats, and I did pen the cupola of another Grom twice with the Grom, so with 6.0 accuracy, they're still hittable of course despite their size. The right side cupola when looking at the Grom is taller with an extra bit of 25mm armor on top of the 90mm ring, so that one should be the easier one to hit and also pen. On top of all of its armor, it has 1300 HP, which is the higher end of HP values for tier 8 tank destroyers, designating it as a well-armored tank destroyer, like those of the Jagdpanther II and Panzerknacker, but not the heavy and well-armored 1500 HP TDs like the T28 and Sturmtiger P. Either way, it's a nice chunk of HP to trade with if you do get penned in this vehicle. That armor buff compared to PC did have its downsides, however, in terms of its mobility, of course. This tank goes 40 km an hour forward, which was brought down from PC's 45, and of course with extra armor you would think its power to weight ratio takes a hit. And it does, but it's not just because it's potentially heavier, but because they lowered its horsepower by 60 at 750 horsepower, giving it a below 15 power to weight ratio of 14.71 horsepower per ton. This is pretty good, however, especially for its armor profile, so it's nothing to really be upset about. It will reach its top speed, and it climbs hills relatively quickly. And most important of all for a casemated tank with such a low gun arc, is its 27 degrees a second track traverse speed, which doesn't sound superb or anything, but it works very well when you need it. It's enough to not be circled by tanks easily enough. It was super surprising to me how nimble this tank feels, and while doing all that it can in terms of maneuverability, it still manages to hit its shots and dish out that powerful damage reliably. Its mobility does not suffer for that extra armor or from the weight of its gun. It's a solid build for this tank that feels a bit too good for its power, honestly. That's probably mostly because this tank was designed for close quarters combat in the first place, because when we get to the concealment, this is where we finally get to something poor about this tank. And you can tell this was meant for close quarters with its bottom end of the barrel, view range, and mediocre camo. It's got 350 meters view range. You aren't spotting for yourself reliably, and with 330 still concealment, the camo does feel pretty rough. You aren't terribly easy to spot compared to bigger TDs, of course, but you're not the stealthiest tank either. You're just there. It's not concealment that will piss you off or anything, but it is the worst aspect of the vehicle. Now that we've gone over the tank as a whole, there's two things I want to discuss. Let's firstly see what players are talking about when they make the comparison to the ISU 152K and say that that tank's actually better. The 152K does hit harder with 50 more alpha damage, and has much better penetration values with its 268 standard and 329 premium penetrations. This is undeniable, but honestly, it's not like the Grom doesn't hit hard itself, and the Grom's pen is also very usable. They're both APCR rounds too, so 290 to 329 sounds like a lot, but they both suffer from normalization and pen drop off. The 152K also does have 5 more degrees of gun arc to the left and right, but that's where the advantages stop, because the Grom has faster shell speeds, better DPM, better accuracy, better aim time, both of those by quite a lot, better armor, HP, slightly better concealment, with both sharing the worst view range of tier 8 TDs, better power to weight ratio, way better traverse speeds, and to me, all of that is well worth the drop in penetration and slight drop in alpha damage. Honestly too, I think the better comparison is actually the Tech Tree ISU 152, because that tank has similar penetration and DPM values with closer accuracy as well. So then when you compare those two, it becomes a question of, do I choose the ISU for its 50 more damage and slightly better DPM for worse mobility, armor, and gun handling, or do I take the alpha hit for better everything else? And when it's put that way, I think the choice is obvious. I think some players might be downplaying the Grom's power here. That's the only reason I bring this comparison up, because it surprises me that the Grom isn't making a bigger statement right now, and the comparison of supposed choice is made to a tank that I see as objectively worse off. I do get that pen is very important, and having more of it is obviously more powerful, but I don't think the 152K fares much better because of the pen, with its lack of everything else that the Grom has over it, in my opinion at the very least. But let's move on from this side conversation, and get into the bigger picture that worries me more than this tank going under some's radar. The Tech Tree line and what this tank tells us about it. With the removal of the mechanic, unless it's added with the Tech Tree line, and maybe this tank is even retroactively changed to have it too, without it, there are some big questions I have for the Tier 10 in particular. The Tier 10 on PC has a damage range of 300 to 800, not too far off from the Grom, but of course it's got better DPM. Its maximum base DPM on PC is 3500, which surpasses the Badger, so it begs the question of what are we going to choose for this tank's DPM and alpha value, since we don't have the mechanic, right? It's a 85 to 175mm gun, by the way, so it's potentially going to be 800 alpha damage. That's my guess. Although, a little side note here, I have heard some ideas that this tank would be 900 or 950 alpha damage, and if so, that would be even scarier, and the idea of that isn't too hard to understand either, because on PC, all of their 850 alpha guns have all become 750s quite a while ago. So their Polish tank destroyer doing 800 is unique and large, but ours, if it did 800, would still be below the 850s that we have kept. So maybe Wargaming Console might see that and buff it to 900 or even equal to the Tyran with 950. Either way, if we nerf its reload on PC by the same amount we did to the Grom, so a 14.4 second reload, its DPM would be around 3300 with the 800 alpha damage that I think it'll be. Obviously, with the higher alphas, it would be much higher. This would put it on par with the Badger, really, and with it being potentially 800 damage, that's quite scary. Of course, our game has outliers that make this less of a unique potential problem, like the Tyran and the Object 268, already having 950 and 850 alpha damages respectively, above 3100 base DPM. But those I feel are problems that need nerfing, and they don't have what this tank will have. This tank not only could be a hard-hitting 800 alpha tank with DPM, but it will be a tank with 0.35 base accuracy, 7 degrees of gun depression, with great armor, and 2000 shell speed. These Polish tank destroyers have insane shell speeds that make sniping insanely easy. But where PC encourages brawling with the mechanic and makes sniping less effective DPM-wise, we're going to have it be insanely effective at sniping with that shell speed and maximum damage potential. This worries me quite a bit, because the Grom is already so darn good. You look at tier 10, and you're not worried about a tankier, healthier, potentially harder hitting, better DPM, better accuracy, 2000 shell speed version of the Grom at tier 10? I know I am. Especially if we copy what we did to the Grom with buffing the armor but lowering the speeds. The armor is already 290mm effective on PC with its 200mm angled front plate. I do doubt the armor change will happen like it did to the Grom though, but it doesn't need to make the tank scary from my perspective. I know power creep is a hell of a thing, and like I said, the Turan and the 268 have already stepped into the above 3k DPM with 850 or 950 alpha damage territory that I don't think we should really be in, but I'm worried about the potential power of this tier 10 and that it might be overlooked like the Grom has apparently been for the more traditional powerful Russian tanks. With all that being said, do I recommend you pick up the Grom? Of course, man! Did you not just hear me talk about how powerful this tank is? Of course, if sniping low gun arc TDs aren't your playstyle, you might not care. But for those who this tank's playstyle might not fit, I still urge you to think it over at least, because maybe that shell speed will make it your playstyle. It's just so darn fast. Of course, you could also wait for the tech tree to come out to try them that way too, since they will have insane shell speeds as well. So it's not necessary to pick up this tank since it represents what's to come potentially, I would presume, next year. The tier 8 tech tree counterpart will differ, but it actually does have 1670 shell speed on its premium rounds, if you can believe it. So again, you could probably just wait to get a free trial on this insane shell speed line. If it does fit your playstyle, you may want to grab it while it's on sale at 7100 gold, which is pretty good for a tier 8. But enough yapping about the tank. The SDP WZ66 Grom, I believe, is the second best tier 8 tank destroyer in the game, right behind the Panzerjäger. But of course, let me know what you think. But let's get into some gameplay of the tank finally. Of course, my loadout before we do. I'm running with a camo net, rammer, and vents. Camo net because it is far more effective on TDs than the other classes and will give you a bigger benefit than putting optics on with such low view range. My consumables consisted of a premium repair kit, food rations, and a premium med kit. Ooh, Cone getting fancy. My commander was my typical TD commander with 6 cents, rapid loading, steady aim, running gun, snapshot, born leader, camo expertise, situational awareness, and silent driving. You could take out running guns since you don't have a turret and put on muffled shot or green thumb if you so choose, but I still ran with it regardless. And here we are with the first game of 2 on Himmelsdorf. We're top tier. It is a city map, so we get to do a bit of brawling, right? That's what I'm going to try and do here on Himmelsdorf. Now, I know this video has already been longer than my usual reviews because we had a lot to discuss in the review portion of this video. And I did decide 2 gameplay videos or gameplay sections for this video was ideal still, because both of them showcase the power of this vehicle. I had so many games to choose from though that were 1800 base XP. Look at that snapshot off the rip on this T-32 crossing. Just snap him like nobody's business with that running gun, right? Now, again, I had so many videos to choose from of doing 5 to 6k damage games, 16 to 1800 base XP, which were only second classes. And ultimately, I decided upon this one because it's my highest base XP game, and the other one, and you'll see why I chose the second one, because of course I did. Now, this tank, I believe I got it down to a .32 accuracy with all of the equipment and the commander I have in it. Yes, it is a .32 from a .4, and that's pretty insanely good, is it not? Again, if we want to continue to talk about the tank we were comparing it to, like, this thing just has everything better than that, in my opinion. And it's kind of like, to me, after comparing it to the ISU 152, it kind of overshadows it. Because you get to be way more aggressive in a vehicle with armor and maneuverability. The ISU 152, the tech tree one, does come a lot closer. You would have saw in the comparison, where the traverse speeds are both good, both 1 degree off. The ISU 152 even gets 6 degrees of gun depression instead of 5, like the 152K. So like, the tech tree one is a better comparison in my opinion because of how much closer it is. But it's just that armor buff and that just slight edge of everything else, despite having that armor, that still puts this one out for me as the obvious choice. And we wanted a brawl here on Banana Road, but there was really nothing to shoot other than 2 heavy tanks, and now we've got to do some running around shooting things. When I want to shoot this T1 LPC, but the guy's just constantly backing up into my line of sight. As soon as I potentially get a shot on him, he finally gets into cover. So a bit annoying, but so far we're at 2,000 damage with 2 kills in the first 3 minutes of the match, and that's with 4 damage ribbons, right? So 2 of those were killing blows, and then we got all that damage from 700 alpha damage. It is a lot. I know, again, there's 750s out there, but you really can't like understate the power of 700 alpha damage. You can reliably 2-shot a lot of tier 8s, not the 1500 tank destroyers or the heavy tanks of tier 8, but you can reliably 2-shot mostly anything else at tier 8. So a lot of the time during my play sessions, I was hoping to get tier 10 games because those have to be, 3-shot, right? But this vehicle just punishes, and it really does. By the way, with the plus minus 20% that we have on console, your highest possible row is 840 and your lowest possible is 560. I got 831 and a lot of 560 somethings, but it feels very powerful when you hit for that 800 plus alpha damage on the lucky rolls that you might get. And while I've said all that, we've doubled our damage now to 3,900, almost 4,000 damage. At 7 to 4, the game's almost over basically at this point, and another Grom runs up on me. I put one into his upper plate, he bounces me, and then I don't know if I want to aim at the tank destroyer to the left there. I can't get one shot by the Grom. I believe I fired first, so I get the reload off first. Got him. My teammate gets the Borsig, so now there's just a 43 HP Tiger 2. He does put a round into me, but my teammate finishes him off. That's 5,000 damage for us and 4 kills. Now, I do have some HE in this tank because it is 80 millimeters of pen and 890 alpha damage, which is very good. I underutilized it though, I'll tell you what. But here I should have probably used it, but at the same time you'll see what I shoot through. Look at all this stuff in front of me. It would have been very hard to get that HE shot in. The HE only has 1,000 shell speed too, so you don't get that hit scan feel. And it really does feel like hit scan. This guy robbed me of my 5th kill and 5,600 damage, but that's still a good match. 4 kills, 5,500 damage. It was pretty quick on Himmelsdorf. We got some block damage and 2021 base XP, which does not go for an ace tanker because this is a new vehicle and it's insanely high. I'm not worried about that though, because this next game was my first game in the tank, right? Again, 2021 base XP, pretty good. Top tier especially. Getting 2021 base XP was, honestly, I'm confused how I got that, because I have a lot of top tier games that are similar to that only get 1,800 or yada yada, but I'm presuming it's because I was the one spotting, but I'm also told that that's not a thing anymore. But before we get into conspiracies or why that happened, it doesn't matter. It wasn't ace. It was still a great game though. It showcased the ability to brawl, it showcased your armor, it showcased your DPM. And I had a lot of games that did that, but I chose that one for the obvious reason of the highest base XP. Now this one was my first game in the tank. Tuesday, it was gifted to me by Buck, and we equipped it. First game of the stream, this was it. And so if I'm showing you my first game, it should be quite impressive, isn't it? Again, many games where I got 5,000s, almost 6,000. I think I got 6,000 twice. Other than this game, like actually cross the threshold, not 58 or 5,900 to where I would round up. But lots of 4,000 or 5,000 damage games in this vehicle. And you can see in the review portion, I do now have a mark on it, so I've played it enough and done well enough that we've got that mark. What I was not expecting was for the hit scan field to be so crisp. Like, it's unbelievably good. I've played the K91, and I don't remember feeling that way about the K91 standard rounds. Maybe it's because it's standard. It is 276, I believe, standard penetration, which is very good. But and it's 1700 shell speed, so it's quicker. But I never felt the insane speeds, or at least don't remember them. Probably because the rest of that tank isn't so great. So getting these insane shell speeds with the armor, with 7 degrees of gun depression, without the limitation of it being my standard, right? It's better pen on tier 8, and dealing 700 damage is probably where the insane feeling comes from. Because you hit things that you really would not have if you didn't have the insane shell speeds. And again, I reiterate, in the portion where I talk about my fears and worries about the tier 10, that gets 2000 shell speed. So in situations where you'll shoot a tank that is about to get right behind cover, but since your shell speed's so fast, you can catch him, right? Or this light tank is long enough, like an RHM, where you don't even have to lead off the tank. You can lead at the front of the tank, and you'll hit the back end, no matter how fast he's going, it feels like. With 2000 shell speed, it's going to be even better at doing that. Now, is that a bad thing? Not really, but like, again, without the mechanic, it allows you to snipe with that shell speed for maximum damage potential, and that's what worries me the most. We've only done 2 shots worth of damage so far in 3 minutes, so it's not as fast-paced as the previous match, obviously, but we're in a bottom tier match for our first game. I'm playing a little bit more passive than I would now that I know the power of this vehicle. Because of my shell speed, I knew I could take that shot, but unfortunately we just didn't pen, because I believe we hit it the upper part of his hull and not the side of his turret like we were aiming at. But again, this was not a game I was expecting one bit, because we were bottom tier. So I was like, even though this tank, statistically, I was already aware that it was going to be very powerful. Because again, you remove the mechanic and you allow me to play at distance with maximum potential while giving me an armor buff. I'm very confused about the decision we made for that, especially. Because, again, like I mentioned in the review portion, this tank was clearly designed for close quarters combat. You have 5 degrees of gun arc to the left and right. It's very limiting. It feels pretty bad in close quarters, but it's like, it's all meant to be trade-offs. There's a trade-off to everything. You have insane shell speed, but the trade-off is to utilize it at distance, you miss out on DPM. You have insane DPM up close, but the trade-off is you have a very limited gun arc that you really have to be like actually looking at your target, which gives up your sides to flanking guys. But your armor was decent. Your armor's better now, and I don't have to play up front. See what I mean? Like, that's a weird little combination that we've decided we were going to do with this vehicle. And I really feel like this vehicle should hit for less damage. It would just feel more fair. I know 750s already exist. We know this. But, you know, the Kyrie hits for 500, and it felt more fair than if it hit for 750. With the power that that thing has over other 750s that have major drawbacks. I feel like this thing could have been the 600 alpha gun of tier 8 and felt more fair. It would still be insanely strong, don't get me wrong. And it would still probably be the second best vehicle at tier 8 for tank destroyers in my opinion. But it would just feel more fair because I wouldn't be able to reliably two-shot 1400 HP mediums, right? Because even if you buff the reload to have the same DPM, it's the matter of fact of how many shells I have to put into you that feels fair. And if I can two-shot so many tanks at equal tier, and especially bottom tier, I can't tell you how many tier 6s we one-shot. I feel really bad. Like, even though the Rover, I believe, has 740 HP, we high-rolled the Rover and one-shot it. And it's just like, This doesn't feel like a derpy gun or a big, like, despite its caliber being 100 to 162, and it sounds like 162 is obviously bigger than a 152, it's really a 100 millimeter at heart, right? The extra 162 comes from just the fins that the shell has. Because again, remember, overmatching with this vehicle takes the smaller caliber of the two. That's your overmatch caliber. So you're basically like a super powerful 100 millimeter. That's what this thing is, really. You're a super powerful 100 millimeter, and you sound like a massive, like, I don't know if it uses the same sound as the shit barn, but it's that disparity that's like a bit rough, because it's accurate, it's armored, it's all these great things, and at heart you're a 100 millimeter, not a 152. You don't have all the drawbacks of a 152 either. So that's why I feel like this thing should hit for less. 600 I think would be nice. Ideally, honestly, I would say even less, but you know, like maybe match it with the Kari and be the second 500, or the WZ Tech Tree Chinese tank destroyer for 560 or something. And we're gonna have to wait and see what Wargaming decides for the. Ooh, love hitting a waffle though. We're now at 3,000 damage, by the way, and we have to wait and see what PC's. Stop cone. PC's done it. We're gonna have to wait and see what console Wargaming decides to do with the Tech Tree Tier 8, because that tank's ranges on PC is 350 to 700, so it's a much tighter range and a much smaller range. So I wonder if that tank is going to be the 600 alpha damage that I'm hoping this thing would be. You know, maybe they choose 600 for that. If they choose 700 for that, I'd be a little worried, especially having to question what DPM they're going to choose. Now here I made a weird play where I was going to rush down the Draugen, but then the Draugen killed my grill, and now I didn't want to rush the Draugen. 215B shows up, full HP, artillery's going to bother me, and this 215B sees a tier 8, so what does he do? He goes after him. Alright, well I see you're coming after me, you can't one-shot me just yet, so hopefully I set you on fire, you know, maybe nice track, right? And here's where the traverse speed comes in. We know it's not a light tank or anything, but if I was in a 152K, I would be getting out-traversed by this guy. We put 2 rounds into him. We blocked one of his shots. He's aiming, or there's no way he's still reloading. He's trying his best, and look, I got to keep my side towards him at a very well-angled part, and I was able to bounce all of his shots and take him out from full HP. And now I have this Draugen to worry about. I'm hoping he gives me his face. He does for just a moment, but my shell speed's quick enough that he can't reverse. But now we've done 6,000 damage thanks to that 215B. The Draugen unfortunately is left alive, but I'm going to ignore him for a moment because I want to shoot this HP off of a ship barn. And look at that. With a 1,000 shell speed round, I probably would not have been able to hit that with the rock blocking my shot and with the speed of the tank going across the screen. But we got it. And now we're at 6,900 damage in a 2 versus 5. Quickly, though, it's going to be a 2 versus 4 and then a 1 versus 4. But unfortunately, we got a Draugen to our rear. The ship barn knows not to poke. We have the P Victoria going to pop up eventually. I make the bad play to say, maybe the ship barn doesn't push me. I kill the Draugen, the P Victoria pushed me. The ship barn did push, though. It would have been beneficial for me to shoot the P Victoria, but who knows, because I would have loved to have crossed the 7,000 damage threshold, but if I got the damage instead of the kill XP, maybe the result of this match might have been different. Now, this 268 is not going to win. We'll spoil that much. But what a fantastic game. And again, this was my first game, so I was not expecting to be able to pull something off like that. Yes, the 215B made a terrible play. He definitely underestimated my capabilities, and it's most likely because, again, this tank was buffed in its armor department too, that we bounced some shells off from him. But we got first place on a loss in my first game in the tank with 1436 base XP, 7,000 damage, and 3 kills. And the reason why I didn't care that we weren't getting ace tankers in those other games and the 2000 base XP one that we showed before that is because this, being my first game on a loss MVP, was an ace tanker. And so I got the ace tanker gameplay that I want to always provide for you guys, and there it is. Yes, the 215B underestimated me, and I was able to get 2,500 damage from him alone, but the tank was still very capable in a position that I should not have been in. I put myself in a bad spot to begin with. So just the fact that I was able to do that, I was able to crawl my way up to 7,000 damage in a horrible position, and against tanks rushing me, just speaks volumes to the power of this vehicle, in my opinion. Again, the 152K would have died to that 215B. Right? But because I am the Grom, that 215B's play ended up being a mistake. Whereas if he did that against a 152, it would have been a good play. But anyway, that's all I have to say about the Grom. Thank you for watching. If you've come to the end of the video, then consider subscribing. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I hate asking, but please, if you're here, you enjoy the content right at the end of the video. So if you haven't hit that button, please do. With that said, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.